So this presentation is entitled Geographic Information System Scoping Methods for Health Impact Assessment for 4 Gulf Coast Environmental Justice Communities. And so the students, there are 2 students that are working in my lab this semester, Joey Batts, she's a biochemistry major, and Aaliyah Shannon, who is a health science major. Aaliyah is planning to graduate in the spring. So they put this PowerPoint presentation together. I am currently working with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice on a Gulf Coast equity project that is funded by the Kellogg Foundation, along with Dr. Robert Bullard and Dr. Beverly Wright, who are the co-PIs. And so the Dr. Beverly Wright, of course, is the director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, and Dr. Bullard is a professor of urban studies. I know I got that wrong, at Texas Southern University. Oh, I failed to mention that Joey Batts, that's Ms. Joey Batts, and Aaliyah Shannon are supported. Their research is supported by a grant from the U.S. Department of Energy through Dr. Lonnie Sharp here at Tennessee State University. So I didn't want to leave out the funders. During the semester, Joey and Aaliyah have been they've been writing a condensed health impact assessment. And so because both of them have aspirations to work in the health science field, I provided them with a research opportunity that focuses upon human health and public health. And so they are both working with me in 4 environmental justice communities in the Gulf Coast region. And so their HIAs are focused upon that. Now, as you'll see in this presentation, the young ladies are using geographic information systems in the scoping process of the HIAs. And so this is their first time using GIS, and so they're using various applications with 2 objectives. One objective is, of course, to provide our community stakeholders with the an idea of the scope and range of geographical based issues that they're being affected by and environmental impacts. And the second objective is, of course, to look at the utility or assess the utility of some of these GIS tools in empowering communities to do their own health assessments or to do their own research. In other words, how can these tools be used in community-based participatory research? As a matter of fact, tomorrow, Ms. Batts, Ms. Shannon, and myself, we will be going to Pensacola, Florida, and we will actually be doing an on-the-ground asset mapping workshop with community stakeholders from the Africatown community in Mobile, Alabama, and the Wedgwood community of Pensacola, Florida. So all 3 of us will actually be on the ground doing asset mapping tomorrow. So let's move on through the presentation. Like I said, they'd be here, but they have other classes. Joey Batts is working with our community stakeholders in the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans, Louisiana. You should probably be familiar with that area. And her other community stakeholder community is Africatown in Alabama. Africatown has a fascinating history that I don't have time to go into right now, but you should Google it. The lower 9th Ward, of course, has became, I guess, known due to how it was impacted during Hurricane Katrina, and is still in the recovery process here some 13 years later. Pleasantville community in Now, Aaliyah, Shannon, her two communities are the Pleasantville community in Houston, Texas, which is a community that's impacted by a lot of issues associated with being close to a port and close to the petrochemical corridor there in Texas. And then her other community is Pensacola, Florida's Wedgwood community that has a long history of being impacted by environmental injustice. And so Bridget Murray is one of our stakeholders in Pleasantville, and Dr. Calvin Avant and Reverend Carrie Brown are our stakeholders at the Wedgwood neighborhood site. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the maps that Aaliyah and Joey created. So I told them to just examine the utility of several mapping programs. This is a map they created from the citydata.com site. Now, what's interesting about the citydata.com site is in terms of its utility for mapping, it's questionable, but it's a very interesting site in that you can actually delineate neighborhoods using the site. Now, whether these neighborhood delineations as defined by citydata.com will jibe with what our community stakeholders say are their neighborhoods, we're not 100% sure of that yet. But what we can do, as you can see with citydata.com, is parse out demographic and socioeconomic data by census block group. And it's a really interesting exercise in mapping. The Joey and Aaliyah also used ArcGIS Online. In this case, they use the imagery with labels base map just to create an image of in this case, Africatown community and environs, and the lower Ninth Ward and environs, just so we can get an idea of the landscape. So they did a really good job of getting into ArcGIS Online and selecting different base maps in order to present this imagery of communities for the stakeholders. Now there's an interesting product called Policy Map. Now Policy Map does require a subscription. Tennessee State University happens to have a Policy Map subscription, so I'm very happy to see that we actually utilize this resource. And so this map is a map, I believe, that Joey Batts created, looking at the asthma rates in Mobile and in New Orleans, kind of zoomed out, and so what the Policy Map platform allows us to do is kind of drill down to the census block group layer and tease out, in this case, health data that aren't necessarily collected at lower than the zip code level of geography. And so this is a very interesting program in allowing us to do what we call small area geography assessment. And so this is a map that Joey created, just looking at regional asthma rates and comparing them with the asthma rates in the community. So now here is Joey's zoomed in map. She's zooming in here to the lower Ninth Ward community. And if you notice, the dialog box looks at the percent of adults having asthma in this specific census tract in and around the lower Ninth Ward. And as you can see, if you look at the color ramp, much of the lower Ninth Ward has an asthma rate that is higher than that of the US average, and certainly higher than the New Orleans average. It's not significantly higher, but that's what's really powerful about Policy Map, is that we can look at the relative magnitudes of any variety of data compared so we can take, say, community level data, say in the lower Ninth Ward, compare it to the entire city of New Orleans, and then compare that to the state of Louisiana, and then compare that, of course, to the national average. So one might expect for the lower Ninth Ward, given its history, to have a significantly higher or much higher asthma rate, but it is higher. What will be interesting would be to look at the pediatric asthma rate in the lower Ninth Ward, because that could be even higher than the overall rate. Joy used another mapping program called EJ Screen. And so EJ Screen is a mapping program that is recently released by the Environmental Protection Agency. And what's really powerful about EJ Screen is that it takes the demographic data that we would use to determine whether or not a community has the characteristics of an environmental justice community, and it combines that with the actual pollution release and pollution exposure data that we would get from the toxic release inventory site and others. And we combine those two variables to produce an index of relative severity, if you will, of various environmental impacts, or even just the magnitude, the relative magnitude of different socioeconomic and demographic variables for our target communities versus others. So if we're looking at this map of the of Africatown, and you look at the color ramp, what that red color indicates is that relative to the rest of the United States, the Africatown community is in the 95th percentile in terms of its low income population percentage. And so that low income population percentage is an indicator of vulnerability. So we do know that when we do vulnerability assessment, that income is a variable that we take into account, and we can clearly see that perhaps this Africatown population might have some vulnerability due to low income. And so low income vulnerability especially is important with regard to looking at resilience. You know, so if this community is impacted by any environmental hazard, how quickly will they be able to recover from that, the impact of a hurricane, from the impact of a toxic release, from the impact of a tornado, how quickly would they be able to recover? So that's what this would be an indicator of. And so Joey Bass did a really good job of using the color ramp with EJ Screen. We would like to have EJ Screen be useful for community stakeholders. Of course, the learning curve for EJ Screen is a little steep. It can be used by stakeholders, but what we're suggesting and what we'll be doing tomorrow in Pensacola is we have our stakeholder community-based organization activists who tend to trend more in the 50 years of age and older category, but we're partnering them with some of our younger stakeholders who are in college or younger. And so what we hope is that this intergenerational collaboration will result in a mastery of the software like EJ Screen. And so one of the things that we've noticed in community-based environmental justice work is, in many cases, the younger generation is kind of on the sidelines most of the time, and the elders kind of run things and manage the nonprofit organizations, and they're out there doing the community-based participatory research. But we really need the younger people to, A, be able to translate this technology to the elders, and B, gain wisdom from the elders, which is something that we need, and C, in some cases, learning this technology can be a sustainable experience for the young people, in that they can perhaps get adept enough at this geospatial technology that they can then perhaps utilize it or to open up career options for themselves, or educational options for themselves. I mean, a lot of these young people probably never heard of GIS, but they're able to navigate those phones they carry around. They can figure this stuff out. They can figure out GIS. And so we are going to be doing that tomorrow. And so here's a second map that Joey made. Here's a lower Ninth Ward. Again, lower Ninth Ward, low income population map using EJ screen. And so we could also look at cancer risks using EJ screen. We could look at a number of potential hazards impacting the lower Ninth Ward community from a variety of pollution sources using EJ screen, if we so chose. But again, these young ladies, this is their first time using any kind of GIS software. And oh, thank you. And so that is, now here's something that's interesting. Here are the community footprints. I believe that these are Aaliyah's stakeholder communities. So we have the Pleasantville community and the Wedgwood community in Pensacola, which is where we'll be tomorrow, yes, in fact. And so if you notice, the community footprints are include data from the census. So here is a map that Aaliyah created showing the residents below the poverty level in Pleasantville and Houston, Texas. And as you can see, the census tracts are not directly aligned with the community boundaries. And again, these community boundaries are community boundaries defined by the city data site, so, or citydata.com site. So we will obviously converse with our stakeholders and ask them, is this an outline of Pleasantville as you all know it? I'm pretty sure that, well, actually, this is an exercise, what we call mental mapping. And so if you were to ask anybody, well, what are the boundaries of your neighborhood? If you ask 10 people in the neighborhood, what are the boundaries of that neighborhood? You're going to get 10 different answers, and probably 10 people arguing that, well, no, that's not in our neighborhood, and this is. And so, but at least with this citydata.com site, we can parse out some data by neighborhood, perhaps. And in this case, the poverty status is at approximately 31%, which is 33% for that census block group, which is probably pretty sure that's above average for the US. Here is the unemployment rate for Pleasantville. So this is another type of data we can parse out. This is unemployment rate for one census tract inside of the bounds of the Pleasantville community. And as you can see, that tract is showing unemployment. This is unemployment specific for African Americans. And so that's, we are primarily focusing upon African American communities. So now we're looking at not just the unemployment rate in Pleasantville, but specifically African Americans in Pleasantville. And that unemployment rate is at 10.8%, which is at least twice the unemployment rate nationally. And so I think the unemployment rate nationally might be around 5%. It might be less than 5% right now. I don't know what the unemployment rate is for Houston, Texas, but I'm quite sure that 10% is higher than most averages. And so that's another indicator of vulnerability, perhaps. If you have a high unemployment rate, then everything that goes along with unemployment will probably impact this community. But then, of course, there are other variables. If this is an older community in terms of age, maybe a lot of people are retired. Might not be as bad as it seems. Aaliyah used another interesting resource called the Opportunity Atlas. And so the Opportunity Atlas also provides a snapshot of various socioeconomic and demographic data. In this case, she's looking at household income in Pleasantville, the Pleasantville community. And the Opportunity Atlas, you'd really have to look at it. It's really an interesting resource because it really shows in relative terms how communities are positioned in terms of providing opportunities for upward mobility for their residents. You know, if you live in community X, you know, how likely is it for you as a young person to wind up in college versus community Y, based upon a variety of variables and neighborhood characteristics. Very interesting resource. And so if you notice that the color ramp here on this map, if you can see it, indicates that this tract, which is inside of Pleasantville, the Pleasantville community, has kind of a mid-range household income of $32,000 per year. But if you look at some of the tracts in and around Pleasantville, they tend to fall more towards the lower income side, not the lowest income side. But again, this just kind of gives us an idea of what kind of community that we are working with. So we're not in an area that is, I guess, seriously impoverished, but we're not in the areas that are blue either. And so that's a very interesting map. So Aaliyah and Joey, they played around with a lot of interesting online mapping programs, including ArcGIS Online. And again, this is really a good experience for them. And so we will be sharing this, of course, with our community stakeholders. Well, I don't know. You might have questions. I was hoping that my students would be here so you could ask them questions. But if you have questions for me, I see Janet is here. So Janet, the interactive, I think I mentioned that we're going to be going interactive. Well, Janet and Rodney are here. So I think we're going to be able to do the interactive experience with the Stratford students. I see that Zoom is working at Stratford. So that will start at 12:45 Central Time. And so I just want to let you two know that we're not going to be doing that on Facebook. We're going to do it, looks like we're going to be able to do it here. That's going to be really interesting. But anyway, but if anyone has any questions, again, there will be a recording available. This is being recorded. So if there are no questions, fine, because I still have the rest of this class to teach. So sorry, we're not just going to do GIS day and say goodbye. So thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. And I'm going to end the meeting, and I guess I'll see Rodney and hopefully Janet in about a half hour or so on Zoom. Same meeting ID.